I hear you now, your thoughts, perhaps your judgments, as they arise. You might say, this man is mad. But I assure you, I am not insane. A fool might seek to reason with those who don't understand the brilliance of his mind. But not I. No, I am far beyond such simplicity. I have lived a life marked by deep, exacting observation and an acute awareness of the world around me. My mind functions as an instrument of precision, far superior to that of most men. In fact, I have seen more than others, perceived more than they could ever imagine. It is this very perception, my superior sensitivity, that gives me the right to claim that I am not mad. Madness is a feeble state, a whimper of the mind in an otherwise powerful body. Madness is a condition that arises when the mind is unable to distinguish between reality and fantasy, when one's reason becomes clouded by the mist of delusion. But what I tell you now, every single word, is not the result of madness. It is the result of a mind too alert, too sharp, for the dullness of everyday existence. It is the result of a mind forced to confront a truth so unbearable that only those of the highest faculties could comprehend its weight. But allow me to begin from the beginning, where my obsession was born, where my purpose and my sanity first began to unravel. Not in the way that you may think, for I do not seek to excuse my actions, nor plead for forgiveness. What I am about to tell you is the truth, unfiltered and raw, an account of events that will confirm that I am no fool, and certainly no madman. There was an old man whom I lived with in a quiet, forgotten corner of the world. We shared a home, one that had long since fallen into decay, a relic of a time when things were still new and bright. The house was dark, and every corner was wrapped in shadow, every creak of the floorboards reminding me that the very walls were burdened with age. It was as if the house itself was alive, not in the way of a living creature, but rather in a deep, perpetual sleep, haunted by the memories of those who had come before. Now, you must understand this about me. I do not possess the weaknesses that others are burdened with. I am not haunted by such things as the passage of time, nor am I troubled by the ever-present weight of mortality. What others would call fears or paranoia, I understand as mere facets of human ignorance. People speak of the disquiet that comes with an old house, and they shudder at the notion of things unseen. But I am not like them. No, the shadows do not frighten me. I do not hear the creaking of the floorboards with unease or hesitation. In fact, I reveled in them. They were the music of my mind, guiding my thoughts into places no one could ever hope to reach. But there was one thing in that house, one thing, that gnawed at my consciousness, and that was the old man's eye. He was frail, and his age was as apparent as the wrinkles that lined his brow and the whiteness of his hair. But it was not his age that troubled me. It was his eye. It was the eye that I first noticed when I moved into that house. A pale blue, clouded with a milky film that made it appear dead, soulless, and yet, somehow alive. It was not an ordinary eye. It held an energy that made my skin crawl, a quiet, insidious presence that gnawed at me. I could not avoid it. It was always there, always staring at me in a way that felt too familiar, too piercing. And every time I saw it, I felt as though the very essence of my being was being analyzed, scrutinized, stripped of all the layers I so carefully crafted around myself. I became obsessed, you see. I could not stand the thought of that eye lingering in my world. The more I saw it, the more it burned into my mind, festering and growing. Every time it turned toward me, I felt as though I were drowning in its depths, helpless and insignificant in comparison. It was as if the eye was constantly studying me, searching for something. Perhaps some flaw in my mind, some crack in my sanity. You see, I cannot call it an obsession of a normal kind. I did not simply wish to destroy it or remove it. No, it was not that simple. It was a need, a drive to eliminate the very existence of that eye. I became convinced that the eye had a power over me, a power to make me lose my sanity, to break my mind piece by piece. The more I thought about it, the more I felt its power growing, like an insidious vine wrapping itself around my thoughts. I knew that I had to rid myself of it. I watched him, the old man, day after day, night after night. I studied his every movement, the way he sat, the way he breathed. But what drove me, what kept me going, was that I It stared back at me, cold, unmoving, as though mocking my very existence. I could not escape it, no matter how hard I tried. It was there when I ate, when I slept, and when I woke. It became the very center of my universe, pulling me deeper into its grasp. In the silence of the old house, where the walls seemed to whisper in the dark, I became more and more consumed by the eye. Every time I looked at it, I felt as though I were unraveling. I began to lose my sense of time. Days passed without my noticing. My thoughts became twisted, fevered, as I ruminated on the eye and what it represented. It was not just a part of the old man. No, the eye became the embodiment of all my fears, my insecurities, my very sense of self. It was everything that I hated about the world, everything that I had ever tried to avoid. And yet, despite all my efforts to avoid it, there it was, staring back at me. In those moments, when I would gaze into its lifeless depths, I would feel the hair on the back of my neck rise. It was as though the very air around me would grow thick, suffocating. My breathing would become labored, and I would find myself trembling, not from the cold, but from something else, something more sinister. There was no escape from the eye. There was no safe corner in the house where I could find respite. The shadows in the corners of the room were no longer comforting. They seemed to be closing in, as though they were conspiring with the eye, as though the very house itself was conspiring against me. As days passed, I became more isolated. I could no longer bear the company of the old man, nor could I endure the presence of the eye. I stopped talking to him, stopped engaging in the normal, mundane routines that had once characterized our lives together. I could no longer sit at the dinner table with him, no longer engage in casual conversation. I could not bear to be near him, to see the eye in all its ghastly, pale clarity. My obsession only grew, and it consumed me. It was the only thing I thought about, the only thing I cared about. My life, my world, had become a battleground, a battlefield between my mind and the eye. It was a war I could not afford to lose. I knew that I had to act, but I could not yet bring myself to do it. My mind raced with plans and schemes, each one more elaborate than the last. But every time I tried to focus, to calm my thoughts, I was confronted with that eye, always there, always watching. The old man was not just a victim. No, he was more than that. He was a symbol, an embodiment of everything that I had ever feared. And as I watched him day after day, I came to understand something crucial. The eye was not just his. It was mine as well. It was my fear, my dread, my downfall. It was everything I had ever tried to suppress. And it was right before me, staring me down. I could no longer live in the same world as that eye. It had become my nightmare, my obsession, my reason for existing. And so, I made a decision, one that would forever alter the course of my life. I would rid myself of it once and for all. It is not easy to describe the creeping horror that slowly enveloped my mind. The house, once a place of mere existence, began to feel like a labyrinth of dread. Its walls steeped in shadows that seemed to shift and whisper with every gust of wind. The old man, too, became less of a person and more of a presence. A mere figure that drifted through the house, his eye ever present, never leaving me in peace. I had always known that there was something wrong with that eye, but as the days passed, I became increasingly convinced that it was not just the eye itself that tormented me. There was something far darker, something supernatural that lurked behind it, a power that emanated from that cursed orb, a force that twisted my very thoughts, leading me into a state of madness. At first, it was subtle. A feeling of discomfort would wash over me as I glanced at the old man. His clouded eye always present, always watching. I would dismiss it at first, telling myself that it was nothing more than the product of an overactive imagination. But soon, the sense of unease grew. I would lie awake at night, my thoughts a whirlpool of confusion and fear. I could hear the soft creaks of the floorboards as the old man moved about the house. But there was something more. Something beneath the sound of the wind rattling the windows, something more sinister. A whisper. A faint, eerie noise that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere all at once. The air would grow thick with the sound of it, as though the house itself was alive, breathing with me. I told myself it was nothing, Nothing more than the sounds of an old house settling, of the wind finding its way through cracks in the walls. But deep down, I knew better. The noises were not natural, not of this world. They were the sounds of something else, something that stirred in the dark corners of the house, something that watched me as I watched the old man. The house seemed to breathe with its own rhythm, its own pulse, and the very air around me thickened as if something were coming, something waiting for me, waiting for the moment when I would finally break. The eye, always the eye, grew in significance. It was no longer just an object of my obsession. It became an entity in its own right. It was as though the eye held the power to control the very fabric of my existence. Its gaze seemed to pierce through my very soul, unraveling the threads of my thoughts, pulling me deeper into a state of panic, of madness. I could not escape it. No matter where I went, no matter how far I tried to retreat into the shadows, the eye followed me. It was not just an eye. It was a presence. It was a dark force, an invisible hand that tightened around my throat with every passing day. I could feel the grip of that eye growing stronger, more suffocating. I could feel it pushing me, urging me toward something I could not understand. It had a power over me, a power that I could not control. It was as though the eye had cast a spell upon me, a spell that clouded my judgment and twisted my thoughts. The more I tried to resist, the more it consumed me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the eye staring back at me, and when I opened them, it was there, watching me, judging me. And so, the obsession grew. It was no longer just a passing thought. It was an all-consuming force that drove me to the brink. I could think of nothing else. I could feel my sanity slipping away, like sand through my fingers, but I could not stop. I could not break free from the hold it had on me. It was as though I had become one with the eye, as though my mind and the eye were bound together, connected in a way I could not explain. The house, too, seemed to change. The creaks of the floorboards, the rattling of the windows. These were no longer ordinary sounds. They were whispers, murmurs that seemed to call to me, urging me to act, to do something. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to grow longer, darker, as though they were waiting for me to make a move, to do what had to be done. The very walls seemed to close in around me, pressing against me as though the house itself were alive, feeding off my growing paranoia and fear that I began to notice things in the house that I had never seen before, things that had always been there but had escaped my attention until now. The worn wallpaper, faded and peeling, seemed to take on a new meaning. The cracks in the ceiling, once insignificant, now seemed to stretch out like long, jagged scars, as though the house were slowly falling apart, disintegrating under the weight of my obsession. Even the old man's chair, where he spent most of his time, seemed to take on a sinister presence, as though it were waiting for him to rise from it, to move, to act. But it was the eye that consumed me. It was the eye that ruled my every thought, my every action. I could not escape it. I could not stop thinking about it. Every night, I would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the house, but it was always there, in the back of my mind, the image of that eye, staring at me. I could see it even when I closed my eyes. It was as though the eye had become a part of me, embedded in my very soul, haunting me, torturing me. I tried to tell myself that it was all in my head. I told myself that I was just imagining things, that the eye was nothing more than a figment of my imagination. But deep down, I knew the truth. The eye was real. It was real, and it was driving me mad. And with each passing day, my obsession grew stronger, more intense, until I could think of nothing else. In the quiet of the night, I began to hear more noises, strange, unnatural sounds that seemed to come from deep within the house. I would hear the soft scraping of metal against wood, the faint tapping of a finger against a surface, the fluttering of something small and light. It was as though the house were alive, breathing, pulsating with a life of its own. I could hear the old man's breathing, too, slow and steady, but it was no comfort. It was another reminder that he was there, his eye always watching. It was during one of these nights, in the deepest silence of the house, that I realized something. The eye had begun to control me. It had seeped into my thoughts, into my very being, and I could not break free. It was as though it had become a part of me, as though my mind and the eye had fused together into something unrecognizable, something twisted and dark. And in that moment I knew what I had to do. I had to rid myself of it. The eye, the source of my torment, the reason for my suffering, had to be destroyed. And there was only one way to do it. I had to kill the old man. The night had come at last. It was not merely the passing of time that signified the arrival of this moment. It was the culmination of days, weeks, months, even years of build-up. I had been patient, so patient, allowing my thoughts to fester in the dark recesses of my mind. The eye had become more than just an eye. It had become a force, a malevolent power that commanded my every thought. The time for patience had passed, and now it was time for action. I had planned this night meticulously, each moment unfolding in my mind with perfect clarity. I could see the old man's figure in my mind's eye, could hear the soft creak of the floorboards beneath his feet as he moved about the house. I could hear his breath, slow and heavy with age, echoing in the stillness of the night. But tonight it would not be just his breath I heard. It would be his screams, the sound of a life taken, the sound of a soul leaving the body, the sound of his death. I lay in wait, every muscle in my body taut with anticipation. The house was quiet, the familiar creaks of the floorboards and the subtle hum of the wind outside mingling in the silence. It was a silence I knew all too well, a silence that had become oppressive over time. My heart thudded in my chest, each beat loud and unmistakable in the stillness of the room. But I could not focus on that. I had no room for distraction. The old man's eye still haunted me, and the time for that curse to end had come. I waited for the perfect moment, the moment when the old man's routine would play out exactly as it had so many times before. He would go to sleep, unaware of the fate that awaited him, just as I had always been unaware of the monster that had taken root in my own soul. The world seemed to slow, the seconds stretching into eternity as I listened for the faint rustling of his blanket, the sound of his breathing shifting as he settled into the night. Every sound in the house became amplified, exaggerated. The slow, methodical beating of my heart seemed deafening, a constant reminder of the need to act. And then I heard it, the soft rustle of the old man's breath, the sound of him turning in his bed, the slight creak of the floor beneath his feet as he shifted his weight. I could feel the weight of the moment settling over me, pressing down on me with all the force of a crushing boulder. This was it. There was no turning back. I had prepared for this moment, thought about it for so long, that I could now see it unfolding before my eyes. I could almost hear my voice, steady and calm, as I would speak the words I had rehearsed over and over in my mind. "You must die," I would say to the old man, "for the sake of my sanity." It was the only justification I needed, the only reason that mattered. The eye had driven me to this point. The eye had rendered me incapable of seeing beyond its gaze. It was no longer just a nuisance. It had become an obsession, a consuming fire that burned away every shred of reason I had left. I waited in the darkness, my eyes trained on the old man's room, my body tense and alert. The faintest sound, his breath, his shifting weight, caused a jolt of panic to shoot through me. But no matter how much my heart raced, I had to stay still. I had to remain patient. Patience had been my ally in the days leading up to this moment, and I would not let it slip away now. The house seemed to breathe with me, its creaks and groans a reminder of the passage of time. The walls seemed to close in, the air growing thicker with each passing second. My mind raced, filled with contradictory thoughts. Was I really justified? Could I really go through with this? But no, I couldn't afford to doubt myself now. I had spent too long contemplating this moment, too much time perfecting my plan. I knew what had to be done. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the moment arrived. The old man, unaware of the storm brewing just beyond his door, lay in his bed, his frail body shrouded in the darkness of the room. I could hear his breathing, slow and even, a sign that he was finally drifting into sleep. I took a step forward, my feet making no sound on the floor, my every movement calculated and precise. I crept toward his bed, my hands steady on the handle of the lantern that I held. The old man stirred. He muttered something in his sleep, a soft, unintelligible sound, but it was enough to send a wave of anticipation crashing through me. His eye, I could feel it. It was as though it were burning into my very soul, making my skin crawl, my blood run cold. I couldn't stand it anymore. I couldn't bear the thought of that eye staring at me. I had to make it stop. Slowly, carefully, I crept closer. The air in the room seemed to thicken, suffocating me as I hovered on the edge of the bed. My mind screamed at me to stop, to back away, to turn around and leave the room. But I could not. I would not. The eye had to be stopped. I reached out, my fingers trembling with anticipation, and gently pushed the lantern onto the bedside table. The flickering light cast long, distorted shadows across the room, making it seem like the walls themselves were moving. Then, in a single motion, I reached forward and yanked the old man from his bed. His eyes snapped open, wide with terror, as he stared up at me. I could see the confusion in his face, the fear that spread across his features. He gasped, trying to speak, but no words came. His mouth opened and closed, but all that came out were fragmented, strangled sounds, like the gasp of someone drowning. I could feel my heartbeat quicken, my pulse pounding in my ears. I could hear his breath, fast and shallow, as his panic grew. His hands, trembling, reached up toward me, but I pushed them away. The old man's fear was palpable, almost intoxicating. I could see it in his eyes, the terror, the confusion, the helplessness. It was the final proof that I was right, that I was justified in doing this. The eye had driven me to this, and now I would rid myself of it once and for all. I didn't hesitate. There was no need. His struggles were weak, his movements sluggish, his strength nearly gone. The very air seemed to conspire with me as I wrapped my hands around his neck. The sense of power, of control, surged through me. The eye, that terrible, soulless eye, was no longer staring at me. It was no longer the thing that held me captive. It was gone. But as I tightened my grip, something strange happened. I felt it. A shift, a crack, deep inside my mind. My own thoughts seemed to scatter, slipping through my fingers like water. For a moment, I thought I saw the old man's expression change, as though he understood what was happening, as though he knew the end was near. But it was too late. The last breath left his body, a soft, labored exhalation that echoed through the room, followed by the eerie silence that filled the air. The old man's body went limp, his hands falling to his sides, his eyes wide open. The room, once filled with noise and terror, was now suffocatingly still. I had done it. I had killed him. But in that stillness, something shifted inside me. The horror of what I had just done began to settle in, creeping slowly through my mind, even before I had hidden the body. My heart was racing, my breath shallow and fast, as I stood there, staring at the lifeless form before me. What had I done? What had I truly done? The weight of guilt began to press down on me. It was not the physical weight of the old man's body, which I had already concealed, but something much heavier, the burden of my own actions. I had taken a life, and in that act, I had shattered something within myself. The guilt surged, a tidal wave that threatened to drown me, even before the body was hidden from view. But it was too late. The deed was done. There was no turning back. The room was eerily silent after the old man's death, the stillness pressing down on me with an intensity one had never felt before. The once turbulent heartbeats that had pounded in my chest, those beats of anticipation, of dread, of rising fury, now seemed to cease, replaced by an unnatural calm, a numbness that consumed me entirely. The weight of the body lay before me, an inert form of flesh and bone. But it wasn't just the physical weight that bore down upon me. It was something deeper, something more suffocating. I stared at the old man's lifeless body for a moment, my breath catching in my throat. His face, once full of life, now looked like a mask, frozen in an expression of terror, confusion, of realization. Perhaps it was the last look he would ever wear, and the last gift I had given him, an eternal expression of fear. But now there was only the body, only the work that remained. The task I had set out to accomplish, the reason I had done it in the first place. Rid myself of the eye, rid myself of the overwhelming burden of its gaze, was over. The deed was done. And yet, something gnawed at me. It was as though the universe had closed in around me, leaving me with nothing but a still room and the deafening sound of my thoughts. The stillness seemed unbearable. The air in the room felt too thick, as though it were filled with something invisible and suffocating. I could smell it, this heavy, iron odor. It was blood. My hands trembled as I looked down at them. The bloodstains were vivid, stark against the pale surface of the floor. I had not thought about the mess that would follow the act of murder. I had been so consumed with my purpose, my obsession, my reasoning, that I had not considered the consequences. The blood, now slowly drying on my fingers, was a reminder of the irrevocable nature of my actions. It had seeped into the fabric of the room, the floorboards, the very air. It was a stain that could never be erased. And as I stood there, frozen in that moment, the reality of what I had done began to sink in. I had murdered a man. I had taken a life. My hand had been the instrument of his destruction. I had removed him from this world, and there was no turning back from that fact. But I could not afford to linger on the thought for long. No, I had to finish what I had started. My mind, so carefully constructed for so long, began to unravel piece by piece, as I went to work methodically and coldly, like a machine. The first task: conceal the body. I lifted the old man, feeling the coldness of his limbs as they hung loosely by my side. His body was stiff with death, and his weight seemed to increase with each step I took toward the trapdoor in the floor. I had done it all in my mind before. I had rehearsed it countless times, imagining the quiet way I would dispose of him, the meticulous care I would take to ensure that no trace of his existence remained. The old man was now nothing more than an obstacle, something to be hidden, erased. His life had meant nothing to me. It had been a mere interruption to the perfection I sought. And yet, as I dragged him into the dark corner of the room, preparing to hide him beneath the floorboards, something began to stir inside me. A feeling I had not anticipated. It was a flicker at first, a small, almost imperceptible flicker of unease. But as I pried up the floorboards and forced the body into the small, hidden space beneath, the flicker grew. It was not fear, not regret, not exactly, but something else, something that had been lying dormant beneath the surface of my thoughts. I closed the trapdoor with a final, hollow thud, and the sound echoed through the room, reverberating in my skull. I stood still for a moment, listening to the quiet. For the first time since the murder, I allowed myself a deep breath. Everything was done. Everything was in place. The body was gone, concealed. No one would ever know what I had done. The old man, his eye, the torment, all of it was behind me now. But the quiet wasn't comforting. The silence pressed in on me, as though the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for something. I could feel the weight of it, this thick, oppressive quiet. It wasn't right. It was unnatural. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed darker now, somehow. The air in the room, once still, now felt charged, as though something unseen was moving just beyond the edges of my perception. Then it started. First, it was faint, a sound that I could almost convince myself wasn't real, that I could dismiss as a trick of my mind. It was the faintest of sounds, like a soft tapping, almost imperceptible, yet strangely distinct. My mind, already frazzled, tried to brush it away, tried to tell me that it was nothing. But the sound grew louder. Thump, thump, thump. The sound was unmistakable now. It was the sound of a heart beating, but not my own. The rhythm of the pulse seemed to come from the walls themselves, reverberating through the floorboards, filling the space around me. The sound seemed to grow louder and louder with each passing second, until it was all I could hear. Thump, thump, thump. I tried to ignore it. I moved around the room, pacing in circles, attempting to block out the sound. It was nothing. Couldn't be real. The old man was gone. He had to be. He was hidden beneath the floorboards. He was no longer a threat. And yet, The heartbeat continued. Relentless, unwavering, deafening. It pounded in my ears, filled my chest, pushed its way into my thoughts. My body tensed with the sensation, my mind unraveling bit by bit. The blood on my hands, the blood on my soul, felt heavier now. I could not escape the sound. I could not escape it. It was as though the very house itself was beating, as though the walls had grown alive, pulsing with a malevolent force that knew what I had done. It was as though the heart of the old man had not ceased beating, that somehow, despite his body being gone, his heart remained in the room, trapped in the walls. Thump, thump, thump. The noise was suffocating. It was everywhere. It was inside me, inside my mind, inside my very bones. It echoed with every movement I made, reverberating through my consciousness. I tried to scream at myself to stop hearing it, but I couldn't. The sound was inside me. I could feel my sanity slipping away, piece by piece, as the sound grew louder and louder. Thump, thump, thump. It was unbearable now. My heart raced in response to it, matching the pace of the thumping that grew in my ears. It was like the walls themselves were closing in, pressing down on me as though they were alive. The eye, the accursed eye, seemed to burn into my mind again. It was no longer the old man's eye. It was my own, my soul's eye, the part of me that could not escape, the part of me that knew what I had done. It wouldn't stop, couldn't stop. It had become my reality. It was everything I could hear. It was everything I could feel. I could not ignore it. The guilt, the weight of it, crushed me from all sides, pressing down on my chest until I could not breathe. The heartbeat became the only sound in the world, drowning out everything else, consuming everything. I had done it. I had killed the old man, and now I could not escape the consequences. The heartbeat would not let me. It had become my own, a constant reminder of the darkness within me. I could hear it now, louder than ever, as if it were calling to me, urging me to confess. It was impossible to ignore. It was impossible to escape. Thump, thump, thump. The sound was maddening. It began as a whisper, so soft that I could dismiss it as a trick of the wind or some other idle noise. But the more I heard it, the more I was convinced that it was real. It grew, slowly at first, like the swelling of a distant storm, an ominous whisper in the recesses of my mind. But then, it became louder, so loud that it was all I could hear. The constant thumping, the rhythmic pulsing, the unmistakable beat of a heart. It was a sound I could not escape, a sound that pressed down on me like a weight I could not bear. Thump, thump, thump. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, the remnants of a disturbed mind. After all, I had done something terrible, something unforgivable. The guilt had to be playing tricks on me. But as the sound continued, and as it grew louder and louder, I realized that it was not just a figment of my tortured mind. It was real. I could feel it in my chest, the pounding of my heart, racing in time with the sound. It was as though the world itself was closing in on me, the heartbeat reverberating through the very walls of the house. I tried to block it out. I tried to force myself to focus on something else, anything else, but it was impossible. It was as if the sound had become a part of me, its rhythm intertwining with my own heartbeat, dragging me deeper into a spiral of madness. I would cover my ears, press my hands to my head, but it didn't help. The sound was still there, thumping louder and louder, echoing in the silence of the room. It was the old man's heart. It had to be. It could only be his heart, still beating beneath the floorboards where I had hidden him. Thump, thump, thump. I convinced myself that no one could hear it. No one else could hear the heartbeat, not in the way I could. It was just my mind playing tricks on me. I told myself that it was nothing, nothing at all. But it was getting louder, so much louder. And with each beat, my grip on reality began to slip. I could feel myself unraveling, my thoughts scattered, my sense of control slipping through my fingers like water. I had to act. I had to do something, anything, to stop the sound. I tried to speak to myself, to rationalize, to tell myself that it was just my guilt, my paranoia, my fear manifesting in the form of a heartbeat. But the sound was relentless, growing louder, more insistent, as though it were mocking me, taunting me. There was no escape from it, no reprieve. It was inside my head, inside my soul, and there was no place left where it could not reach me. Thump, thump, thump. I became frantic, unable to sit still, unable to think straight. The sound consumed me. I could feel my heart racing, my mind spinning in a frenzy of panic and fear. I could see the walls closing in on me, the shadows growing longer, the room growing smaller. The very air felt thick with the sound, pressing down on me, suffocating me. Couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. The heartbeat was all that existed, all that mattered. It was all I could hear, all I could feel, all I could think about. I began to lash out. I shouted at the walls, at the ceiling, at the air itself. I demanded that the sound stop, that the heartbeat cease. But nothing changed. The sound persisted, louder than ever. A constant drumbeat in my ears, in my mind, in my very soul. I could feel my mind fracturing, cracking under the weight of it, and yet I couldn't stop myself. I couldn't escape it. And then, as if by some twisted fate, there was a knock at the door. I froze. The sound in my ears grew louder, if that was even possible. The heartbeat thudded, louder and more insistent, a deafening roar in my mind. My hands shook as I approached the door, my legs trembling beneath me. I knew who it was. I knew what was coming. I opened the door, and there they were. 2 officers standing in the doorway, their expressions unreadable. They were here to investigate. They had come because something was wrong. They had come because they suspected something was amiss. And all I could do was stand there, staring at them, my heart hammering in my chest, louder than the heartbeat, louder than anything else in the world. Thump, thump, thump. "Good evening," one of the officers said, his voice steady, his eyes scanning the room. "We've received a report of a disturbance in this area. We need to ask a few questions." I nodded, forcing a smile. I tried to act normal, to appear calm, but it was impossible. My mind was a storm, a whirlwind of thoughts, and the sound, the heartbeat, was all that I could hear. My eyes darted around the room, desperately searching for something, anything, to focus on, something to ground me in reality. But there was nothing. There was only the sound, the beating, the thumping. Thump, thump, thump. The officers didn't seem to notice. They were polite, professional, but their presence in the room only made the air feel heavier. The walls seemed to close in tighter, and the heartbeat grew louder, louder still. I tried to answer their questions, to speak calmly, but my words were stumbling, my thoughts disjointed. Every time I spoke, the heartbeat grew louder, more insistent, as though it were mocking me, daring me to lose control. I could feel my grip on reality slipping further away, my mind splintering into fragments, pieces I couldn't put back together. The officers began to walk around the room, inspecting the area, their footsteps heavy on the floor. I could feel the tension rising in the room, a tension that mirrored the chaos in my mind. Every movement they made, every sound they produced, seemed to send the heartbeat into overdrive, amplifying its power over me. It was unbearable. It was too much. "Everything seems in order here," one of the officers said, his voice distant, as though he were speaking from far away. "But we'll need to take a look around the house. Just a routine check." I nodded again, my throat dry, my heart racing. I knew they would find something. I knew they would uncover the truth. They would find the body. They would find the trapdoor. And they would know. They would know everything. But no, I couldn't let them. I couldn't let them find the truth. I had to maintain my composure. I had to stay calm, act normal. I had to control myself. But it was impossible. Thump, thump, thump. The sound was too loud now. Consumed everything. My thoughts, my actions, my very soul. I couldn't stop it. It was too powerful. I felt my mind unraveling completely. The walls closed in tighter, the room spinning around me, and I could no longer distinguish between reality and madness. My heart was racing, my hands trembling, my body soaked in sweat. The officers were still talking, but I couldn't hear their words. All I could hear was the heartbeat. Thump, thump, thump. I could feel the panic rising, the overwhelming surge of fear and guilt that had been building inside me for days, for weeks, for months. The heartbeat was a reminder, a constant reminder of what I had done. It was the old man's heart, still beating beneath the floorboards, still alive in my mind, still condemning me. I couldn't take it anymore. I did it. I did it. I screamed, my voice breaking as the words spilled out of me in a torrent of confession. I killed him. I killed the old man. The words choked off in my throat as the reality of what I had just said hit me. The officers stepped back, their eyes widening in shock and confusion, but it didn't matter. It didn't matter anymore. The heartbeat, louder now than ever, was all that I could hear. It was the only sound in the world, and it was driving me mad. I killed him. I shouted again, louder this time, my voice filled with desperation. It was me. I couldn't stop it. I couldn't control it. And with that, the dam broke. I collapsed to my knees, overwhelmed by the weight of my guilt, the weight of my confession. The heartbeat continued, louder than ever, as if the world itself were punishing me for my crime, echoing in my mind, in my body, in my soul. And in the end, there was no escape from it. There was no running from the truth, from the sound, from the guilt that had consumed me completely. Thump, thump, thump. The walls were closing in. The room, the house, the world itself seemed to grow smaller, suffocating me with every breath I took. The heartbeat, the constant, unrelenting thump, pounded in my ears, drowning out all else. It was everywhere. It was inside me. It was part of me. My body trembled under the weight of it, my heart racing in time with the sound that had consumed my every waking thought. The room seemed to spin around me, the shadows in the corners of my vision stretching longer, warping into grotesque shapes, mocking me, judging me. I could feel my sanity slipping further, piece by piece, like a thread unraveling from a fraying rope. I tried to focus, to think, but the sound, the incessant thumping, drowned out all rational thought. It was the old man's heart. I was certain of it. It was still beating, still alive in the walls, in the very foundation of the house. I had buried him, hidden him beneath the floorboards, but the sound, it wouldn't stop. It wouldn't let me forget. It was as if the old man's death had somehow tethered his soul to the house, to me. I could feel him, hear him, as if he were still there, still watching, still judging. The guilt, the crushing weight of it was unbearable. I had murdered him. I had taken his life, and in doing so, I had condemned myself. Every beat of the heart was a reminder, a tormenting pulse that echoed in the chambers of my mind. I tried to block it out, to ignore it, but it was futile. The sound was omnipresent. It was a part of me now, inescapable, a constant reminder of my crime. My thoughts became fragmented, disjointed, slipping in and out of coherence. I would tell myself that it was just my mind playing tricks on me, that I was imagining the heartbeat, that it couldn't possibly be real. But no matter how hard I tried to convince myself, the sound grew louder. It was growing, expanding, filling the room, filling my thoughts. I could no longer distinguish between the sound of the heartbeat and the pounding of my own blood. The two had become one, intertwined, inseparable. And then they came. I opened the door slowly, my movements sluggish, as though my body were moving of its own accord. I looked into the eyes of the officers standing before me, their faces neutral, unreadable. They greeted me, and I nodded, my mouth dry, my throat constricted. They came inside, their eyes scanning the room, taking in the details, the faint tremor in my voice, the unnatural stillness of the house. But they didn't know. They couldn't know what I had done. They couldn't hear it, the heartbeat, the thumping that was growing louder with each passing second. I wanted to scream at them, to tell them the truth, to confess everything. But I couldn't. I couldn't bring myself to speak. Instead, I forced myself to smile, to act normal, to pretend that nothing was wrong. I told myself that I could get through this, that I could lie, that I could keep up the facade just a little longer. But with each word I spoke, The sound grew louder, more insistent. Thump, thump, thump. The officers continued their questioning, their voices steady, calm, but their presence in the room only made the thumping louder. It was as though they were intruding on a space that was no longer mine. My mind was unraveling, my thoughts scattered like fragments of a broken mirror, reflecting 1,000 shattered pieces of reality. I couldn't focus on their questions. I couldn't hear their words. All I could hear was the heartbeat, the incessant, maddening beat. Thump, thump, thump. I tried to control myself to maintain some semblance of normalcy. I answered their questions mechanically, my voice shaking with the effort to remain composed. But I could feel my mind slipping further away, the pressure building inside me, threatening to explode. I could feel the weight of the secret, the guilt of the murder, pressing down on me. It was too much. I couldn't keep it inside any longer. I had to confess. I had to speak the truth or I would go mad. I did it, I whispered, my voice breaking under the strain of the words. I killed him. I killed the old man. The officers looked at me in confusion, their brows furrowed in disbelief. They didn't understand. They didn't know the truth. They couldn't hear the heartbeat. They couldn't feel the weight of the guilt that was crushing me. They couldn't know what I had done. I killed him, I shouted, the words bursting from my lips in a torrent of panic and guilt. It was me. I did it. I couldn't stop it. I couldn't control it. The I drove me to it. I had to do it. I couldn't take it anymore. The officers stepped back, their faces pale, their hands reaching for their radios. They didn't believe me. They thought I was mad, that I was just a man caught in the grip of a delusion. They didn't know the truth. They didn't understand what I was saying. But it didn't matter. I couldn't stop now. The confession poured out of me like a river breaking through a dam. Unstoppable, relentless. I did it. I killed him. I hid the body. He's beneath the floorboards. You have to find him. He's there, still beating, still alive. You have to hear it. You have to listen to the heart. I was shaking now, my whole body trembling with the force of my words. My mind was spiraling, the guilt tearing me apart from the inside out. I could feel the pressure building, the thumping growing louder, more insistent. It was all I could hear, all I could feel. It was overwhelming, suffocating, consuming. I could no longer distinguish between reality and madness. The line had blurred, and I was drowning in the depths of my own mind. The officers exchanged a look, unsure of what to do. One of them took a step forward, his hand on his weapon, as though ready to restrain me if I became violent. But I didn't care, couldn't care. The only thing that mattered now was the truth that had been gnawing at me, tearing at me, ever since the old man's death. I can't take it anymore, I screamed. You have to hear it. The heartbeat is still beating. It won't stop. I did it. I killed him. He's beneath the floorboards. You have to listen. The officers hesitated for a moment before finally nodding to one another. They didn't believe me, but they had no choice but to investigate. They moved cautiously, their eyes scanning the room, their hands hovering near their weapons, unsure of what to expect. But I knew what they would find. I could hear their footsteps as they moved toward the floorboards, as they began to pry them up. And as they did, the sound, the heartbeat, grew louder, louder still. It was unbearable, maddening. I felt as though my mind would shatter, as though the very sound of it would tear me apart. And then they found it. The body, the old man, still lying there, hidden beneath the floorboards, his heart still beating, still alive in some twisted way. The officers stepped back, their faces filled with horror as they realized the truth. I had confessed. I had told them everything. There was no turning back now. As they handcuffed me, as they led me out of the house, I could still hear it. The heartbeat, the thumping. It was all I could hear, all I could feel. It was the sound of my guilt, my punishment, my fate. I had murdered the old man. I had destroyed myself in the process. And now I would face the consequences.